This is a different approach. I've described that questionnaire approach, the quantitative approach, but this is a different approach to looking at the same question, which we could call the experimental approach, where you conduct an experiment to see if there's any link between autism and scientific talent. So here we have a test of physics, which we've given to children with Asperger's syndrome to see how well they score. And this is just one example from the test. It's a multiple choice test. There are 20 questions like this. And those of you who like these little problems, I'll just read out the question to you. If the wheel rotates as shown, which is anti-clockwise, then P, this point here, will A, move to the right and stop, B, move to the left and stop, C, move to and fro, or D, none of these. The correct answer is meant to be C. Well done. That was very quick.
First it'll be moving down, and then it'll be, and if it's going that way, it'll first be moving down.
Okay. You'll have to believe me that I didn't pay this man to answer the question, but it's a very good illustration of the results I'm going to show you, because here we have the results of this test. So, whoops, let me show you the results of that test. That we've got the group of people who don't have a diagnosis. We're calling them the control group. These are teenagers in the general population, and they're scoring about 10 out of 20 on this test. So they're finding it quite tough. There are 20 questions. Here are the group with Asperger's syndrome, who you can see are scoring higher than the comparison group, which means that despite having a so-called disability, they're actually outperforming the people in the general population. Now, this result is all the more striking when I tell you that the group with Asperger's syndrome were actually younger than the comparison group. The comparison group were aged 12 to 16, they were at high school. The group with Asperger's syndrome were aged 8 to 11 years old, so they were still in primary school. Despite being younger, they're actually performing at a higher level, which means that their Asperger's syndrome is not leading to disability in all areas. When it comes to scientific thinking, it was actually leading them to precocious ability, showing talent. This is another experimental method where we can test your attention to detail. This is a test that psychologists have used over many decades. It's called the embedded figures test. Some of you will have seen it before, but what you have to do is look for this target shape as quickly as you can, hidden in the overall design up above. And although this pointer, this laser pointer, is not very bright, I will just trace it out for you. If you look at the red dot, you can see the front of the cube there. And then hopefully this is helping you see the cube. I don't know if that helped or not, but you can. The idea is how quickly, it's a timed test, how quickly can you see the target shape hidden in the overall design? Well, what we find is that people with Asperger's syndrome are both faster and more accurate at this test of attention to detail. So the scores that you see are a combination of your speed and your accuracy. And these are men and women in the general population who don't have a diagnosis. And you can see that people with Asperger's are scoring higher than people in the general population, meaning that they're faster and more accurate in their attention to detail. People who are scientists, again, we've picked them out as a group, are scoring midway between the general population and people on the autistic spectrum. But once again, we're seeing this link between scientific ability and autism or Asperger's syndrome, that these two things seem to go hand in hand. So in the next part of my presentation, I want to explore 5 different hypotheses for why there should be a link between scientific talent and autistic traits. And I'm going to take you through them one by one so that we can go into this in a bit more detail, a bit more depth. So the first hypothesis, the first idea, is that maybe the link between autistic traits and scientific interest, maybe we see these two things as associated because they both have one thing in common, namely a strong interest in systems, what I call hyper-systemizing. So let me say a little bit about this. First of all, the term systemizing. Systemizing is really the drive to analyze or build a system. It's what we do when we're trying to figure out how a system works. I'm sorry?
Sort of like Dr. Temple Grandin.
Yeah, well, Temple Grandin is a very good example because she has Asperger's syndrome. There she is at the back. Hi, Temple. And she also is a scientist, so she's interested in systems from a scientific perspective, but maybe also...
She's designing the squeezing machine for comforting.
Exactly. So she designs systems as well as tries to understand systems. And the question is the link between autism and scientific talent, does it arise because in both cases there's a strong interest in systems? Obviously, there are lots of different kinds of systems out there. There are mechanical systems, like this computer. There are natural systems, like the weather. There are abstract systems, like mathematics. And there are collectible systems, like your collection of CDs, which may be more or less systematically organized. But the key thing is when you systemize, you're trying to understand the system in terms of rules or laws, because that's how systems work. You're trying to figure out the laws that govern the system. So what we've done is we've designed another questionnaire which we call the Systemizing Quotient, the SQ, which simply measures how strong your interest is in systems of different kinds. So the first example here on this questionnaire, if I were buying a car, I would want to obtain specific information about its engine capacity. So you just say whether you agree or disagree with this statement. So that's obviously a question about mechanical systems. If there was a problem with the electrical wiring in my home, I'd be able to fix it myself. So now we have a question about an electrical system. Some people are going to say that they agree with these statements because they are interested in systems like this. Let's look at the results. So on this questionnaire, you can get a maximum of 80. And what we see is that people with Asperger's syndrome score very high compared to people in the general population. They are reporting a strong interest in systems. So do people who are scientists, again, scoring much higher than people in the general population. So once again, what we're seeing is that these two groups, people with autism or autism spectrum and talented scientists, are scoring at a very similar level on another measure, in this case something that measures how interested you are in systems.